Welcome back to Leosophy. Taking a break from all the religious episodes. Well, actually, I think we're kind of done with those for now. To talk about another religious concept. It's something that struck me as interesting, and I just don't feel like it really falls in line with all the other things that I've been talking about in previous videos, so it's just sort of like a one-shot. And that is Titanomachy. And I just think this is an interesting thing because I started noticing that it's everywhere. So much so that I actually looked further into it and found out there was actually a word for it, which is Titanomachy. It all started when I was studying Celtic mythology, and I noticed that what were those guys called? Not Anshe. What were they called? The Tuatha. The Tuatha. They came from another world, and they were the ancestors of the modern-day Celts, which, again, that kind of goes hand-in-hand with a lot of the foundation myths that I was talking about in previous episodes, like with Ingwe Frere and the Anglo-Saxons and the Aborigines and the people, or the beings would actually be a better accurate term, in the, not the before time, what's that called? Dream time. Yeah. Interesting stuff, that the idea that people would descend from things. But one of the things I noticed was that the Tuatha they fought against the Fomorians, which, it's kind of funny. Tuatha to me, at least, sounds more ominous, and then Fomorian sounds more like, that sounds like a lemur or something. But the Fomorians were like this diverse and broad and frightening range of. They kind of remind me of the monsters from what was that Clive Barker movie that did so poorly, but it was actually kind of entertaining? Nightbreed. Because there's no hard rules for like what they look like. Some have one eye, some are just like made out of shadows. Like there's no clearly defined anatomy for the Fomorians. But they fought against the Tuatha, and it led to sort of like the creation of the modern, the world that we see, that kind of war. And when I was studying that, I was like, that's like every other religion, it seems. Like you got the Devas and the Asuras. I talked about that in the demon episode, but you've got these younger gods fighting these older, more chaotic gods and creating the modern world. That's in Hinduism. And then you've got the Titans, the older gods. Again, it's usually the older beings that are overthrown by younger, more powerful beings, more civilized beings. That's very important. And even the name itself, Titanomachy, that comes from the Titans. The Titans are these older, more primitive, chaotic beings that don't like humanity. That's another thing that you often see, but not always. And then they get overthrown by the Olympians, the modern, in the best sense of the word, Greek pantheon. And like it's just everywhere. If you look at so many religious structures, you've got an old, powerful, not necessarily a civilization, but at the very least an old, powerful culture and group, and arguably a nation of non-human beings with amazing powers and often diverse physical forms, like forms that don't really have a set defining point. The way, if you describe a person, it's usually, he has like one head in the middle and a couple of shoulders, a couple of arms branching off of those, 2 legs, a torso in between. That's how you describe a person. There's a universality to it. Same thing with a dog. Even if it's a Chihuahua or a Pit Bull, it's got 4 paws, claws on those paws, long muzzle would be a better word, ears that flop or stand up. You see where I'm going? There's a tail at the end. They're easy to describe. Then when you describe the Titans, it's like, well, that one of them is the sky. It's just air. And then another one is just like basically just like imagine fire and shadows. And then same thing with like I mentioned before with the Fomorians. One of them's just made out of darkness. The other one is just like, I don't know, like veins. Like whenever they're described, they're just all over the place. There's no template to base them on. They're just all over the place. That's interesting. That seems universal. There's no single. There's not one myth I can think of where the foundation of the world isn't based on some sort of fight between something that's gigantic, diverse in forms, chaotic, often antagonistic towards humanity, or at the very least towards a civilized society, and then they're overthrown by a younger, more anatomically and physiologically cohesive group of people, people in quotes because they're usually gods, and then that sets the stage for the world that we live in. That's really common. It kind of weirds me out. I mean, there's a lot of possibly skeptical interpretations that make sense. Like, for example, nature itself, is very diverse in forms, and a lot of times these Titan-like beings, they're comparable to forces of nature, so that kind of makes sense. And then also, if you think about it, civilization itself is sort of a way of homogenizing things, so that kind of makes sense. And then also, maybe it was because they dug deep, when they were starting agriculture, and they found all these weird bones that were, dinosaurs and extinct mammals, and maybe that's what led to, Titans. Like I previously mentioned in a video, I mentioned that cyclopses are based on mammoth skulls. Because if you look at a mammoth skull, it looks astonishingly similar to a gigantic human skull with a big occipital orbit for one big eye, which is actually where the trunk goes. It's just the sinus cavities, but it looks like one big eye would go there. So maybe that's what caused it. But, the reason I made this video, the reason why I found it interesting is, one, it spans multiple cultures, and two, what if it's real? What if there was a sentient race of beings that was just happened to be really diverse, like Clive Barker's Nightbreed, and they were overthrown? I don't know. That weirds me out. It's interesting. I don't ascribe to that view. It's just this is why I like mythology. It kind of makes my imagination run wild. I think about all these what ifs, all these possibilities. It's a very fun thing about mythology, and it's one of the reasons why I also try to get other people interested in mythology, because it's fascinating. But yeah, it struck me as bizarre that so many religious foundation myths start off with chaotic, powerful, physiologically very unusual and unorthodox beings being overthrown by beings that are much more similar but not human, much more similar to humans, very powerful, set up an hierarchical kind of structure, like the kind that we tend to emulate in our day-to-day lives. Again, if you drop 100 people off on an island, in no time they will go from anarchy to something that resembles an hierarchy that, isn't that different from Olympus or the post office. It's pretty universal. So, yeah, it seems very interesting to me, and it's one of those things that you see so many different places that it just begs the question, maybe there's something to that. Or maybe, as I've mentioned in my religious videos, maybe it's a fundamental part of the human experience. Maybe it is that spontaneous and natural drive that we have, that we see order out of chaos and we interpret it as such. So it's really cool. Look into the different Titan battles if you're more curious. And that's really all I've got at this relatively short video for one of my Thursday vids, but still. Yeah, Titanomachy, fascinating thing. Like, share, subscribe, keep asking questions. Bye.